Damn sneaky. Oh, I got you. I bet you rue the day you come into Birdell Tolley's yard. I'm a doggy. That don't beat all. I was just killing a snake. That damn booger got away. Don't you come back here again, you low life. You reckon a snake can hear? If it can, where's its ears? Yours must be from the real estate office down in Franklin. They told me that somebody's come up here and look over the place. Pretty good little hike, ain't it? Yeah. And I guess you wouldn't think I'm a crazy old woman stomping around my yard talking to himself. I guess you're just probably right. Poor old woman living up here on the backside of Goshen all by myself. I might act a little queer. Whew. I am all tuckered out. I need me a good fresh drink of cold spring water. You just sit here in the shade and rest your legs. Make yourself comfortable and I'll be right back. I just gotta get me a fresh drink of water. Oh, man. Oh, boys, that's good. You know the water in that bucket right there? It comes from a spring way up there in the cove. Runs all the way down the hillside to my back porch. Yes, sirree, Bob. All the way down the hillside to my back porch through these hollowed out pine logs. My Westley, he's once done that. Wesley was my husband. He was a wondrous clever man. Why, he could make anything. Folks, I like to come out here and sit in the evening, watch a day turn to twilight, watch the birds go to their nest, listen to the chickens a-fussing in their trees back there. They like to roost in that big old locust back there. Oh, and listen, you can hear the rain crows. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Oh, that's a mighty lonesome, sad sound it is. Well, it's time for me to take a little dip. It's a filthy habit. Don't you take it up. It stains your teeth, taints your breath, ruins your love life. Makes a snuffy out of you like Sadie Hoskett. Now you may have think you hear or see the alcoholic with the jitters. You ain't seen nothing till you see that old woman a hankering for a dip of snuff, stone broke, and her snuff can's empty. You know, I hear that snuff ain't nothing but the leavings on the floor of a tobacco barn. You know 80? 80 is a sister to Sadie, ain't such a snuff thing. Well, 80's boy, Zandy, he went off down to Winston-Salem, got him a job in that big cigarette factory down there. He's the one told me that. He said, they just shovel it up off the floor like that. And then they put it on these big old screens. They sift it around get the rat duty out of it, don't you know? And then they pour the rest of it in these little tin cans like that. Now, I think he just told that to Sadie, hoping he'd cure her of her dipping. He didn't. Well, it's a late time in the day to be worrying about such as that. Now, folks, I don't get much company up here. So, you'll just have to make allowance for my poor manners. There used to be folks coming up here all the time. Bea and Ruth, my sisters, and their youngins, and my boys, Albert and Asbury. They kept things jumping, I tell you. Oh, when we lived down in Hazel Creek, them boys, they bring their girls up here and there's a making music, don't you know? And folks would tell me they could hear Albert's banjo all the way down to the Story in Proctor. But all that's changed now. Well, I ain't even no Proctor no more. Albert, he got killed in World War II in the South Pacific. Asbury, he got caught down in Knoxville for running moonshine, don't you know? Bea and Ruth, always both dead. Our young'uns has moved to the city. High Point, Greensboro, Detroit. Now Wesley, he'd been gone about 5 years. There was one daughter, Evelyn. She was living down in Clayton. She's still alive as far as I know, but I don't never see her. No, it's just poor old me, by myself. You know, that snake I was talking to when you come up, I think it was a copperhead. Now, I ain't for sure. It could have been harmless too, but I ain't one of them that goes around checking them out to see what they are. But now Wesley, he'd pick them things up with his hands. He'd bring them in the house, or sometimes he'd wrap them around his neck. I was having a kid, son. He'd say, "Now, Birdy." You know, that's what he always called me, Birdy. This is a hog snake, and it's harmless. Don't kill it now. And then he'd take it out to the barn or the corn crib and turn it loose, and he'd catch rats. I'd see that old feller every once in a while when I was out there at the barn getting corn for the mule, or when I was forking down hay for the cow. That thing, it would swell up, oh, make this awful hissing, buzzing sound. That scared me half to death. But Wesley said, "Oh, that's its only defense, is swelling up like that and making that noise. There's nothing to worry about. If it is too big for it to swallow, it couldn't hurt you." Well, I got used to it after a while. And I named him Jeremiah, after one of them prophets in the Bible. You know, it's always a huffing and a puffing. Leastways, that's what it sounds to me like he's a-doing when you read what he says. Now, there's an old preacher man down at the Holiness Church, and that old feller, he put me in the mind of that hog snake on account of the way he could huff and puff. He'd get up there and he'd say, "Now, I'm a-telling you, are you listening? The time is nigh." Yeah. Oh, it's fun. Oh, it's better fun than it was. We'd see them Western picture shows down in Proctor that Wesley loves so good. You know, when me and Wesley got to courting and going around with each other, he used to make up all manner of things and tell me, and I believed every word he said. He wanted to talk about some of these snakes. And I'm just quite ashamed of the things that I believed back then, but finally I caught on to when he was joshing me, but it took years. Now, he had one sister, Myrtle Jane. Oh, she tried to warn me about Westley. She says, Birdie, Westley has been known to stretch a blanket. Now, this cause he opens and closes his mouth. It don't mean it's a prayer book, and that means he tells lies. Did that Westley wanted to tell these stories about some snakes. There was the hoop snakes, and the milk snakes, the joint snakes, and the whoop snakes. Now, these hoop snakes, them things would put their tails in their mouth like this, you know, and they'd roll down the hill like a wheel. After they got to going pretty fast, they'd straighten out like an air spring. And they had a poison barb in the end of their tails, and that thing would stick in a tree. And that poison would make that tree swell up, maybe 10 times its normal size. Well then, this feller, he'd come along out there in the middle of nowheres, and he'd see that big old tree there. He'd just chop it down. Yeah, take it to the sawmill, have it sawed up into planks. And then they'd take that lumber back to their place and build a house and a barn and maybe a chicken house. But when they went to paint it, the turpentine in that paint, he'd draw the poison out of that lumber of the house, and the house would begin to shrink. Ooh, then people just barely have time to get out of there for it squeezed them to death. And maybe the mule and the chickens, they wouldn't make it. Now, I believe that. Ain't that pitiful? When Wesley see that I believed that whooper, he'd tell about these old milk snakes. Big old fat, goofy looking, warty looking snakes, no teeth or nothing. But they was harmless. Except they'd go around and they'd milk the cows. And the cows, they liked it. Oh yeah, they'd follow them snakes around. It was something else. And I said, Wesley, you don't mean that, I said. And he'd tell about these joint snakes. And you'd take the axe and they'd try to chop them up like this, you know. And them things would grow back together for sundown. The head of that snake, he'd go around and he'd pick up them pieces one by one, and then they'd snap them in a line like they're supposed to be, just sort of like a freight train of picking up boxcars. And then he'd tell about these swoop snakes. Now, them was the kind, they'd waylay you if and you didn't go to church regular. Yep, they'd catch a hold of your nose and pinch it good and tight like that. And then they'd take their tails and they'd just whoop the devil out of you. But Wesley said, well, there was one thing about them, that they could whistle so pretty, had this little quaver in their voices. Wesley, I said, that is hard to believe. And then he'd tell about these birds. They flew backwards like this, you know, and they made beautiful music out of their butts. Wesley. Now, what could you believe? I was 16 and I married Wesley, and I hadn't never been nowhere. I was living over at Lions Creek, over in Swan County, don't you know, with my mama. I'd never been nowhere except to church. You know, when I was a girl, that's where you courted, was at church. And you could really meet the boys at a revival. Mm-hmm. I stayed with my sister Bea over in Alarka. She took me down to this big week-long revival down in Leatherman's Gap. And there he was, all that black curly hair and that devil grin, don't you know? I was just standing there singing, just as I am without one plea. And this wide-eyed Jasper standing there in a white shirt and a string tie. He sidles up to me, takes hold of my songbook, starts singing along with me. And the next thing you knew, we was outside the church just a-walking and a-talking. And the next night he showed up again. And when that old Jasper of a preacher, he started hollering and preaching about hell, fire, and damnation. Them young people, they just got up and they went outside, and there's more walking and a talking. See, maybe they didn't have no sins when they went out there in the dark, but he has a few when they come back in. But not me. No, I was a good girl. Or maybe it was Wesley, he is a good boy. But anyhow, at the end of that week-long revival, we was engaged. And in a month, we was married. And the first place that we lived was down in Hazel Creek. That was the prettiest place that God ever made. See, he's up this pretty little cove, and the mountains just rises way high and right back down to the ground, to this great big old stretch of bottom land, a spunky little branch running through it. Wesley built us a little cabin there, fixed us a big old wraparound porch on it, and we'd sit out in the evening and watch the mountains fade, listen to the whippoorwills. Now, I've been happy, so many times in my life, but that was the best. Wesley cleared that bottom land all the way down to the dirt, grubbed out all those stumps and roots, planted 20 acres of corn, fixed me a little garden, and I raised lettuce and onions, beets and cucumbers, new pole beans, new orange taters, corn, and pumpkins and kershaw, and them hillsides just covered in blackberries, and the branch had speckled trout in it. Everything in the world that anybody could want, right there. I had a little Guernsey cow and a mule and 15 boardwalk chickens and an old blue tick ham named Andy. Now, there's some people, they don't know it, that they're happy right then when it happened. But me and Wesley knowed it. We knowed it right then. But you know, we didn't talk about it much. I think it sometimes people can ruin things talking them to death. One evening we were sitting out there on the porch, listening to the rain crows so fur off, summer breeze blow up the smell of honeysuckle and cedar out that little holler, you know. And we was just sitting and talking. All of a sudden Wesley said, "Well, it's time for us to consecrate the garden." Now, Wesley, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Well, it's just kind of like a blessing, he said. It's to make sure that your garden's fertile, you know. Wesley, do you want to pray? You want me to get your Bible? He comes over and kneels down in front of me, looks at me in the eyes, and he says, Birdie, have you never heard of consecrating the garden? No, I said. And he said, well, it's an old custom. It come from Ireland. It's to make sure that your garden's fertile. All right, I said. And then he said, we had to get naked. Now, I hope I ain't offending you or nothing, but that's what he said. Said we had to go out in the garden and have wanton, carnal knowledge of each other. That's what he called it. Wanton, carnal knowledge. I ain't never heard of such, I said. And he said, Birdie, do you own a good garden? Meister big tomatoes, roasting ears that just melts in your mouth, butter beans, squash, and okra, pumpkins, the biggest and the best. Well, sir, I done it. Tell you the truth, I didn't mind it all that much. We see, we was young and real taking it to each other, if you know what I mean. And so we consecrated that garden every night, all spring, and sometimes hit us several times a night. Well, I just thought, here we are, 10 miles up Hazel Creek, no neighbors. So one night it'd be the tomatoes. The next night we'd consecrate the cornfield and so on. Now I think I knowed what that Westley was doing, that Westley. But now you know, that was one more fertile garden. I never seen tomatoes that big before in my life. And then another night we was sitting out there talking, you hear the rain crows fur off. And Westley told me he was thinking about getting him a job down in Proctor. Now that surprised me. Tell you the truth, we didn't want for much. I mean, what we didn't raise, we could barter every second Tuesday of the month. I'd hike down to the store down in Proctor, right above Proctor. I'd meet the rolling store. It was a big old store on wheels that this fella, he driven around Hazel Creek, and you could get such things as salt and pepper, coffee and tobacco and needles, stuff like that, you know. But we raised near about everything that we needed. But no, Westley all fired up, and he wanted to go down there to that big W.M. Ritter Lumber Company, get him a job in the sawmill, so as we could have the finer things of life. Well, one morning he took off real early. He went down there to that big W.M. Ritter Lumber Company, come home real late that evening, and he was all excited. Birdie, he said, they're building a town down there. Churches, schools, and big old stores. And he done already seen the foreman of that sawmill. He told him he could tack him on at 12 cents an hour. He says, we're gonna cut them big trees, some of them 8 foot thick, and some of them 80 foot high. Let me tell you about them saws now. They is called misery whoops. You know, first of all, a work day was 10 or 12 hours a day. And that can take the spunk out of you real quick. You took a hold of one of them big, long, 8-foot saws, and you wrestled with that limber blade big and forth for an hour or two. And you felt like you'd been picked up by the heels and frailed against the ground or something. And Westley come a-dragging in of the evening. He'd fall asleep at the table. And I got used to shucking his clothes off of him, dragging to bed where he slept like a rock till daybreak. And folks, it weren't too long till we quit consecrating the garden. Now, as for the finer things of life, 'tweren't too long till we had window curtains, store-bought flour, a new axe, a wind-up phonograph, and a fiddle. We moved to another house down there on the ridge just above Hazel Creek. You can see all of Hazel Creek from there. I just hated leaving that little cabin up there in the cove. It were a company house that we moved into, and Westley bought me an icebox and a Maytag washing machine. Those old finer things of life, they can be overrated. You know, we never did like that town. It was so close to those little old company houses, and you could smell the people and trash gathering around there. We lived far enough up the mountain ridge that you could hear the rain crows, but you'd hear the sawmill working. And the old hissing, buzzing sound of them steam engines. But we lived like that about 15 years. Raised 3 young'uns, Albert and Asbury and Aveline. Oh, and one other little one. Ida Lee had died when she was 3. She is what they called a blue baby. The doctor called her a blue baby. Something wrong with her little heart. Wesley liked that job for a while. I guess it is a satisfying thing, seeing big old trees falling down. Wesley talked about too, he said, the thunder and big trees are falling, thousands of trees, big old 80-foot trees falling like that, big stacks of lumber. But then bad things started happening. One day, Wesley come home from work, said he wanted to go up the holler again. Well, the next day, I got up and I fixed us a basket of fried chicken, bowl of tater salad, cornbread, and fixed us a jar of buttermilk, throwed in a few apples. And we took off and we started climbing that mountain, went on up there above where that little cabin was, where we got started out, don't you know? And there on the hillside under the apple tree, close to the cabin, that's where our little baby, Ida Lee, lay asleeping. Where are we going, Wesley? I said. And he said, I want to go on up here far enough that I can see into Georgia and Tennessee. Well, them young'uns says just plumb wore out by the time we got to the top of that mountain ridge. What an awful sight it was. Now, what used to be a beautiful blue and green ocean stand of hickory, oak, and cedar, cherry, walnut, and chestnut, all them big old trees just cut down. Nothing there but stumps and raw dirt. It's awful quiet there. In all that quiet silence, I looked around and I could not see a thing that was green. Wesley started talking. He said, it looks skinned like a big animal that's had all its hide took off. I think he cried. As some I didn't ever see much of was Wesley a-crying. Then he said, I knowed it was bad, but I never dreamt it'd be this bad. You know, you can't see things like that when you're working right out there in the middle of them. They was working every cove and every holler around there. And the foreman of the sawmill said they wanted to cut every tree in the world if they could. He said that they told him that there's runaway forest on the other side of the mountain. They'd been burning for weeks and nobody knowed how they got started. Oh, we had that picnic there, but it wasn't too pleasant with all that thick fog and that smoke there. You couldn't see into Georgia and Tennessee neither. It's awful, the muddy creeks, the land washing away from the banks. He told us that he'd learned that W.M. Ritter was packing up his lumber camp and was going to move somewhere else. Probably the towns like Bushnell and Proctor, they just dry up. He says, you know, my job was only just temporary. And I asked him, I said, well, Wesley, what happens next? What happens to the workers? And he said, well, the layoffs has already started. Some of them men is trying to hold on to their jobs and follow them lumber camps wherever they went. Some of them, though, is moving to towns like Gastonia and High Point and getting jobs in the cotton mills. Some of them is moving as far away as the state of Washington to the place called Cedro Woolley. There's plenty of trees there. Trees last forever, a lifetime. And then he asked us, you want to move to Cedro Woolley? Albert and Asbury is about 11 and 12 in. I shook her head, no, Paul, we want to stay right here. And I said, I don't want to go no place else neither, I said. Eveline, she is about 9 then. She didn't say nothing. And Wesley said, good. But I said, Wesley, what are we going to do now? And he just said, we're going home. And I said, where's home at? And he pointed down the holler to that little cabin where we got started out. Bless Jake, that's what we're doing. Left them window curtains in that company house, left the ice box and electricity, come home to the lamplight in that little cabin, and to the spring house where we set our milk and butter in a little trough of cold spring water. And we sat out on the porch, watched the fog come down. Wesley, he kept a talking. He said, you know, I always thought they'd be trees. Them fellers I worked with, they did too. Now I'm just ashamed I didn't know no better. Shame I took it for granted that somebody was looking after things. Well, soon after that, Wesley got to making furniture. He made this little chair right here with a split oak bottom, and he made a lot of little rocking chairs with the cane bottoms. He'd sell or barter with them. Evelina's about 15 then, and took a job as a housekeeper down in Bushnell to this widow woman living down there, and finished school down there. The boys, they moved out too. They got jobs in Proctor. We and Wesley was up here by ourselves. We got to consecrating the garden again. So everything's just wonderful till the day that old TVA man showed up on the porch. He's carrying his coat flung over his shoulder like this, and had something in his hand. It looked like a rolled up window shade, but it turned out to be a map. I did not like that TVA Peckerwood from the start. You know, he wouldn't look at you straight in the eye, and he smiled a lot. I think he thought I was comical in some way. I was holding my dulcimer on my lap when it come up, and quick as he seen it, he said he'd like to buy it from me. He went on to say that he had him a collection of rustic musical instruments at his house, and that'd fit in with them real good. Wesley is out in his little workshop in the barn when he come up, and I think he heard him talking, and he come on in the house, and just as soon as Wesley showed up, the Peckerwood started into his big speech, and he had brung us a wonderful opportunity. And then he unrolled his map. He wanted to buy our land, but I ain't for sure that buy is the right word. He went on to say that there's going to build a big dam in the region called Fontana, and when it's built and done, He'd help America to win the Great War. Me and Westley had heard of Pearl Harbor and all, but I just didn't get the connection of building that dam and of winning the war. I asked about it, but the answer I got didn't make no sense to me. Aluminum, he said, like it was a magic word. Well, I didn't know what that meant neither. But he went on to say that with the building of the dam, there'd be a lot of wonderful jobs opening up in this poverty-stricken region. And when the dam was finished, the electricity generated from the dam would help in the war effort. Now, Westley told him, we didn't want to sell our land. And the Peckerwood just smiled real big and said, we didn't have any choice about it, that the government had authorized him to acquire land and we would be relocated. Me and Westley was confused, and Wesley asked, why? And the Peckerwood said, because of the water. Like his plain as day. He said, the water is going to cover our land. Whew, we just gawked at him then. He said, well, we had a bit of time, and he could come back just a little later and get us to sign over. Wesley said, what if we just don't agree to sign? And the Peckerwood said, why, Mr. Tolley, that would be so unpatriotic. Now you do want us to win the war, don't you? And then he went on to say that there's going to be a lot of steady jobs opening up. He figured a good steady job would give you people a sense of pride. Or me, I thought we already had that. Wesley said, what if we just don't agree to move? And the Peckerwood said, then we are authorized to remove you. Then, as if he hadn't said nothing serious, he come over to me and he said, asked me again if I wanted to sell my dulcimer. And I said, no, my dulcimer ain't for sale neither. And he picked up his coat and his map like he's gonna leave. And that Wesley spoke out. He said, maybe you'd like us to buy a Swanette. Oh my Lord, I thought. Wesley, that old Jasper, he won't take the bait, but he did. A Swanette, he said. Wesley said, I just thought it'd be one of them rustic musical instruments that you'd be interested in. And the Peckerwood said, is it a percussion or a wind instrument? And Wesley said, I don't know if you mean, do you blow in it or hit it? Most of the people around here, they squeeze them. And he looked at me and winked and he said, ain't that right, Birdy? I said, yeah, you squeeze them. He's writing everything down that Wesley says in his little notebook with his pen. So he catches up with his writing and he says, what shape is this instrument? And Wesley said, well, I've seen round ones, but mostly they're square. And the Peckerwood sat down in his notebook. How big is this instrument, he says. And Wesley said, oh, about 20 feet by 20 feet. Now that brung the Peckerwood up some, but he still kept on writing. How does this thing work? Well, Wesley just goes into this big detail telling about it. Now you get your auger and you make these auger holes around the top of that Swanette. Oh, maybe about a foot apart. Go all around there with them holes. And then you got to get you a big drove of pig, and you want a big, large number because you know you want good volume on your music. You run them into that Swanette, but once you get them in there, you got to separate them according to the musical scales. First, the little baby pigs is wee, wee, wee. The middling sows is oink, oink, oink. Don't forget about the big bass boars. Ugh, ugh, ugh. And then you got to get their pigtails, run them through them auger holes, fasten it on the other side of the swine head. Now you're just about ready to start, but you need you a good set of pliers, one for each hand. Now, the cording can get a little tricky, but you can do it with practice. I heard the old rugged cross played on a swine net one time, and it made me cry. The peckerwood has stopped writing. He is a sitting there. He is red as a bee, and he looked at Westley like he hated him. Westley smiled right back, just as innocent as you please. The peckerwood finally picks up his coat and his map, and he takes off down that holler in a hurry. After he's gone out of sight, then I just said to Westley, Westley, you just had to stretch a blanket, didn't you? Westley said, you know, I believe I hurt his feelings. Then he sat down and we began to talk. He said, I know it has to be at least 10 miles from Hazel Creek back to my back porch, but there's a whole lot of coves and hollers in between. I don't know, I said, but if it's true, it's make it hard for him. And Wesley said, that we will, and we did. Then in a couple of weeks or so, things began to change. You'd hear them cutting them big old trees. They cut them down, let them fall to the ground, and then they cut them up and set fire to them. The smoke would come drifting on up the holler to where we was at. Yeah. And then one day I was out walking, and I seen it. The water, I mean. The sun is sparkling on it like that. It's pretty. And then I begun to see all kinds of little varmints that the water was stirring up. See little rabbits and squirrels and possums scampering around out there in the leaves. You'd see things you didn't see much in the daylight, like coons and owls. Me and Wesley sitting out there in the twilight, you'd hear this old rustling sound of the bigger animals hiking on up the mountain to try to get in the dry. One night, I woke up and the water had made it in the house. I leaned over against the edge of the bed. I seen a snake swimming. It come in the front door, went at the back. I looked up at the ceiling and the rafters. There's every imaginable kind of snake slithering in and out of the attic. Blue snakes, rattlers, copperheads, moccasins. Ooh! I seen my broom floating in the water over at the door. I got out of that bed right quick and I wandered over to try to catch up with the broom. But you know, it went out the door and on around the house. Wesley said we just best stay out of the house, and we slept out on the porch at night. Wesley was a snake handler, you know, and next morning he went back in the house and he got out all them varmints out of the ceiling, took them out there and turned them loose, and they went slithering on up the mountain to get it in the dry. I was awful scared and nervous out of that. I couldn't sleep good at night. And that's when I took a strong dislike to snakes. Well, the old peckerwood, he kept a-coming. He's coming in a boat now. Wesley go back in the house and get his 12-gauge shotgun and ask him to leave. We ain't signed nothing yet, he said. But that Wesley was just a bluffing. He's just about like that old hog snake that Wesley put in the corn crib years ago. Wesley couldn't hurt nobody. He sure couldn't he couldn't shoot nobody, not even that old TVA pecker would. He's just a bluff, and that's what it was. We knowed we had to go. So me and Westley got some of the things out of the house and drug them on up the hillside to the smokehouse. Hid us up there in the dry, you know, and then we just waited. That's when I learned that Evelyn was ashamed of us. She come, and now the TVA man brung her. She asked us to leave like decent folks. That's what she said. We to leave like decent folks. She had been ashamed of us for years, the way we dressed and how we talked and how ignorant and foolish we was. When she left, she said she never wanted to see us again, and she was as good as her word. So we had to go. And they took us, and what little plunder we had, moved us over to this little town called Almond. There's a lot of people living over there, and some of them was in tents. The TVA man gave Westley a check, told him we'd be so much better off living in a civilized community now. Westley told him, "You run us out of the cove, I reckon, but our heart's still down there in the cove." That's what he told him, our heart's still down there in the cove. And I told him, you know, we left something else down there in the cove. He shook his head. He said, he knowed it. Our little Ida Lee sleeping down there under the waters of Fontana now. He said, maybe we could get somebody to take her over to Cowie, where my folks was buried. I thought about that. What would it be like to move her, or should we let her stay? But I just said, leave her be. You know, in a way, it seems like the place is still there, and as long as she's down there under the water sleeping. Well, as soon as Westley and the boys got a roof over our place up here, they took off down the holler. They'd be gone way late in the evening, and they'd leave out in the morning before daybreak. I got to leaving their supper for them in the warming closet and fixing a little sack of ham biscuits to take with them in the morning. And that went on about a week or so, and finally they come in and says laughing and giggling, punching each other in the side and acting like little kids. Finally I just said, Wesley, you're making moonshine, ain't you? Now things got awful quiet then. Wesley said, well, Birdie, whatever put such an idea in your head? I tried to mind my own business, but I was real curious about what was happening and everything. It turned out there's an old logging road up there on the top of the mountain. It come off all the mountain, on down to the Nantahala. The boys and Wesley called it the Winding Stars. And they'd leave out of here in the evening with the lights out on the truck and the moon is shining over the mountain ridge, singing this song about the moon is shining on the winding stars. And they'd be gone a couple of days or so, and they'd come back. But when they got back, it's all duded up in these cowboy vests, big tall hats and cowboy boots. I guess them was the outlaw years. I learned that Wesley's best customers was over at the TVA project, where them men is working 24 hours a day building that dam. Wesley told me that it's having a morale problem or something. I reckon so. Them men working 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, nothing to do on their off time, you know. They took to making dances over there for them. And they called in these mountain bands to play for it. My boys, as the Hazel Creek Ramblers, is one of the finest groups that played. So we had them a coming and a going. Now the boys, they didn't get rich or nothing, but they never saved a nickel. I guess mountain folks just never learned to save money. Westley said that was money that needed to be spent real quick. It just seemed to burn a hole in his pocket. Silk shirts, Stetson hats, Gibson guitars, spiffy little roadster. And the boys, they got to playing real regular over in Knoxville, Tennessee. And Westley, he's more interested in the special blends of moonshine. He went off down to Atlanta and he got this recipe, what was called cherry bounce. Oh, it wasn't nothing but just some moonshine with a little cherry juice poured in it. But all of a sudden, he had him a new market in Asheville and in Atlanta for what he called ruby red. Oh, and boys, they'd play so much for us in the evening. We'd be sitting out on the porch and they'd play this song that I love so good, Red River Valley. It also made me a little sad though, because it made me think of Hazel Creek and the Lost Cove and Land. From this valley, I say, you are going. And then they'd play Pretty Polly and this old marsh melody. Can I sleep in your barn tonight, Meister? Sometimes I'd get my dulcimer out and I'd play a song about a little baby dying, put my little shoes away. And we'd all cry, think about little Ida Lee sleeping down there under the waters of Fontana now. Oh, it's all just a blur now. Things that happened that year before we lost the boys. Westley used to say, love it fierce while you got it, 'cause you will lose it. He was so right. You know, our big trees, the lost land, Ida Lee. Albert got drafted 6 months before the war ended. He's sent to the South Seas. I got 2 letters from him before he was killed in Iwo Jima. I just said, well, I still got Asbury. But one evening, he's running moonshine over to Knoxville, and some federal agents waylaid him on the Kingston Pike. He tried to outrun them, but he wrecked his truck on a rain-slick road. All of a sudden, it's just me and Westley up here on Goshen by ourselves. Westley got so quiet, didn't go nowhere. He took it awful hard about losing his boys. And then we got to sitting out on the porch, talking a lot. Ain't that strange? We never did before, but now we did. We talked about the big trees gone, the TVA project, the lumber camps, the government. And finally, Westley says, you know, Birdy, finally, you just have to fight back. Ever since I can remember, people have been abusing me. Now, I always believed that you had to respect the government, but they make it hard for you sometimes. I always believed in justice, but them men at the lumber camps learnt me, if I wanted justice, I'd have to go after it myself. And that's what I done. That's why I got to making that moonshine, so I could get back what was due me. Westley still told me them big whoppers. The only difference was that I knowed it now. One evening he told me about the Great Smoky Mountains, about how the people got run out of their homes like TVA had done us. He said there's a big buzzard. It didn't have but one wing and it flew around in circles over Klingman's Dome. And a wild dog that was loose, it'd go around to the lumber camps and find axes, and it'd eat the axe handles, every one of them. He said there's a big critter that was like an elk. He didn't have no knee joints, had to sleep a standing up. Westley never meant no harm telling them big whoppers. He just loved to hear people see them open their mouth big and wide and say, "Ah, you don't mean it." Last lie he told me was the day he died. Leastways, I think it was a lie, but maybe not. Was out here talking. Well, he was out here. He was chopping wood, and his axe hit a knot of a green piece of oak, and it glanced, and that sharp blade, it hit him right here in the leg. It was a bad cut, deep, and the blood just gushed out. I was in the house when it happened. He called me out here. He wasn't scared or nothing. He just said, "Birdie, come here." I come out of the house, and I seen him laying there on the ground. The axe was standing or lying there beside of him. I knowed it was bad. We couldn't do nothing. We was 10 miles from any neighbor, no car, no phone. "Oh, Lord," I said, "please have mercy." He asked me to come and sit down beside of it. I sat down and I put his head in my lap. He looked up at me and smiled. He took my hand, he did. And he said, "Listen, Birdie, I'll see you again, sweetheart." All the time his blood is draining all out of his body. But that was the last thing that he said. "I'll see you again, sweetheart." Then he's gone. Oh. Oh, what an awful thing to tell Connie. I shouldn't have told you yet. I'm just a foolish old woman. I don't see many people, and when I do, I always talk too much. Listen, you can look over the place all you want to. The barn's up there on the hill. The spring house is off down there in the holler. It still works. Some snakes gets in it every once in a while, but I don't think it'll hurt you or nothing. I sold the bottom land to some Florida folks last year, but they still about 30 acres left. Oh, the place is awful growed up. Now, Hazel's a nice lady that comes to see me over at social service. She wants to know if I need anything. I don't. They want to move me over to a rest home in Franklin. I reckon not. No, I'm too old, too poor, I wouldn't fit. No, I just best stay here with Meister. Meister's asleep out there on the porch. That's my big old tomcat. He's ever faithful to me. Oh, me. I had a funny dream last night. I dreamt that we was all back down at Hazel Creek. We was sitting out on the porch. We was laughing, talking, singing. All of a sudden I noticed we was underwater. But it didn't bother us none. We just kept on laughing and talking, singing. I looked up at the moon a shining. Yeah, it's underwater too. The whole world is underwater. Whew. Folks, it's getting late. I'm gonna have to let you go. But do come back and see me. Please come back. And if you do, I'll laugh. I'll just play and sing you a song. Until then, remember me when the candlelights are gleaming. Remember me at the close of a long, long day. It'd be so sweet when all alone I'm dreaming, just to know that you remember me.